Hello and welcome to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast, where we talk about leading remote teams, online collaboration, and working in distributed organizations. My name is Pilar and I'm the director of Virtual Not Distant, a company where we help managers of remote teams to get the most out of online collaboration. You can find out everything we do over at virtualnotdistant.com. Hello and welcome to episode 332 of the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. And this is a What's Going On episode where we're going to take a look at two articles, actually. Well, one is a report. One is the State of the Global Workplace 2023 report by Gallup, which has recently come out. And there's also an article from Forbes, which is all about how our psychological contract at work is changing. And when I say we're going to discuss with me today, as always for these episodes, is Maya Middlemiss. Hello, Maya.
Hello, Pilar. Hello, everybody listening. Hope you're enjoying the summer so far.
If you have summer.
If you have summer.
if you're what, friends in the, what hemisphere are we in? North?
We're in the Northern Hemisphere, yes. So if you're listening down under, then, wrap up, stay warm.
Yes, I love it. I love that we can easily talk to our friends in the other side of the globe.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So as we were saying, this article came out recently, and I think someone on LinkedIn pointed my direction to it. It must have been Tammy Bjelland, because she really seems to be on top of everything that comes out. And well, the message of this is that it's all about the report is all about employee engagement, and the summary is everyone seems to be more engaged at work than we would expect, but everyone is also really stressed out.
Tricky one to measure as well. I can see they've tried to come at it from some interesting angles, but it's a very subjective thing, maybe. It's a very important metric, though, and if we can compare engagement levels, then I think that's very insightful.
Yeah, and also it's funny that the stress levels are coming out so strongly as well, even though, so we can have engaged employees who are also stressed. So
yes, and we can support people through stress. We can help them manage that, and then maybe that can deepen their engagement or their sense of connection at work.
Yeah. So we thought we'd picked a few of these points. We're not going to go through the whole report. We'll stick the link in the show notes so that you can have a look at it if you want. It's actually really accessible. It's
14
really easy.
pages. So
how long?
14 pages. There's a lot of information for 14 pages. I just looked at the PDF again because in my head it was like 50.
Well, I think you have the amended version because I deleted some. I deleted all the data.
Right. That makes more sense.
So if anyone is interested, they also break down the whole thing by country, I think, later. But it is actually, I think you're right, it was like a 40-page document, but it's really well laid out, so you can just navigate through it. So yeah, let's just go through it. Listeners, if you have any comments, Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com or contact form virtualnotdistant.com. So the first point is the percentage of employees thriving at work reached a record high in 2022. And they reckon, this is the highest level since 2009. So we're going back quite a lot. And they seem to think that the gain in this is mainly because of what's happening in South Asia, where 33% of people seem to be very engaged, as opposed to 23% in...
Yeah, it's curious. I wonder how much of that might be impacted by the lockdowns in China going on for so long until so recently, and people just getting back to work.
That's the thing, isn't it? That there's so much. What's so interesting is, as ever, we have all the numbers of what's happening, but we probably don't know why.
Trying to make sense of it. Even, comparing, they say the highest level since 2009. We're just trying to think how much work has changed since then. How can we compare how people feel about it? Maybe some people are working on exactly the same thing in the same way as they were 15 years ago. I don't know, but it seems like such a difference, such a gulf of time.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, that work has changed not just over the last 3 years because it's what is most recent and it's the biggest change, but actually there was already starting to be a trend in all kinds of ways at work and what was happening there. So yeah, you're right that it is a very long time and a lot has changed. So yeah, so yeah, so that was South Asia now leads the world in employee engagement at 33%.
And engagement up, I think, however we might criticize the comparisons, engagement up has to be a good thing. Hopefully people are more engaged at work, they're happier, they're more involved. So yeah, I could support that, hopefully.
Yeah, that's good. And especially with all everything we've heard about, we had the Great Resignation and so many people reevaluating their lives as well and thinking, what am I doing at work? It's good. I think if engagement is good, then
it's directionally good.
Now, having said that, and this is where I find it quite interesting. So 23% are thriving at work, and this is the highest. However, it does not mean 23% is only 23%.
True. Yeah.
Because the majority of the world's employees are quiet quitting.
Oh, back to this awful phrase again.
Just when we thought we'd got rid of the phrase. Yes. So thriving at work, which is engaged, is 23%. Quiet quitting, not engaged, 59%. And then 18%, they call it loud quitting, actively disengaged. And that's a little bit more worrying.
Yeah, I assume that, they don't care if the boss knows that they're looking or interviewing or whatever. I mean, how loud do you have to be?
Yes.
I'm sure it doesn't mean they're having big rows about it, but...
So that's a little bit less exciting. One of the things that I found is they said that some of the reasons they then try to understand what is going on with this disengagement that they're calling quiet quitting. And they say quiet quitters, and then inverted commas, I'll quote, are waiting for a leader or manager to have a conversation with them, encourage them, inspire them. And I understand, I know someone who is incredibly engaged at work, as in he's always trying to improve things. He brings more than his whole self to work. He loves his work. So then outside of work, he's also thinking about it. And yet one of the things that's frustrating him is that he's trying to sit down he's actually got 2 line managers and he can't find time, or they can't find the time to sit down with him. So I understand that waiting to have a conversation. However, I also think that we cannot rely on our managers to encourage us and inspire us.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an interesting factor because it sheds sort of a potential new understanding of the idea of quiet quitting, that there's silence on both sides, maybe that a relationship is simply being taken for granted, and maybe all it would take is to kind of break the quiet and have a conversation. But this is part of this whole problem that managers don't know how to manage at a distance. And often the people in the workplace haven't had to deal with distance before as well. They might be quite advanced in their career, but we haven't got the vocabulary or the background to make these conversations happen, or to maybe change our expectations around how often they will happen. What do we want our managers to do? Are we sharing that? Or do we just disengage? Then we go from quiet quitting to loud quitting. I don't know what the answer is.
There's a very interesting point about the quiet quitting, that maybe stopping some of that actually just requires some kind of conversation, or more often, or like you said, just redefining that. I wanted to bring up, I've been reading a book called No Hard Feelings, which is a beautiful book because I don't know if I've mentioned it before, it's about emotions in the workplace, and it has some wonderful cartoons to go with it. Really
that's why
funny.
You like it. You love your cartoons. They're so expressive, the ones you create. And
thank you.
They can say so much.
Oh, yes, exactly. And this is the thing with this. They really contrast with, they're so funny and sarcastic as well. Anyway, I discussed this with Tim in the Management Cafe podcast, I think episode 57, and we talked specifically about hiring. But the reason that this came to mind was because in the in the chapter on motivation, they list 4 reasons why we lose motivation at work. And they say it's lack of control over our work, or we don't find the work meaningful, or we aren't learning anything, or don't like our coworkers. So that's why, to me, this thing about that quiet quitters are waiting for the leader to, basically run their lives for them almost, which is how it's landing with me. I'm being a bit sarcastic here. Is it like, well, if we can't do that, we've got also a responsibility to stay engaged at work. And there's other smaller things that we can do to regain some of that. And I understand it's very easy always coming from the other side and from the outside and saying this, but I also think and I think it might have to do also with this concept of having more distance between us, that if we have more distance in time, not just in location with a lot of organizations, we've got to take more responsibility. So if we are losing our motivation, we've got to work harder than maybe when we were seeing our colleagues regularly, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something in that it's coming back to this idea that people don't know how to do remote yet in many cases, and that goes for both sides. And there is a responsibility. I think perhaps if you were in the office together and you knew that your mood and your motivation was starting to decline, you'd kind of expect your manager to pick that up more quickly. And they could see your body language and your loud sighs or however else you express. Whereas if you're working remotely, things can fester and build up more, and you might get nothing back because if you're still delivering your work, then, your manager might not even notice how disengaged you are. So there does have to be communication on both sides, especially if something's changed. And if it's you where the change is, hang on a minute, I'm really not happy anymore, then your manager's not telepathic, and we don't have an app for that yet.
Yeah, we don't.
It's probably coming. I mean, there'll be some AI that can read your mood in all your emails or something and tell your manager that this one's about to quit or something. But until we have that, if we want that, I don't think we do. We have some responsibility to speak up.
Or to actually using technology as it is now. There's you can use apps, you can use things to, but you have to identify. And you can do surveys, you can use Kona, you can do things like that. But they have to have some weight. They've got to be used properly, and someone has to say, "Hey, exactly what you're saying. Hey, I can't really see what's going on, or we can't really communicate anymore what's going on. What are we going to do?" And can tech help? There's also it's mentions some different reasons for disengagement, and it lists them as no growth, no change in organization, even when issues are raised. I mean, I feel for that.
Yeah.
They feel neglected by manager, which we've touched on, and then in a way that work gives no opportunity for personal life growth. I think I took some of these from. Actually, I don't think it lists the reasons. I think it doesn't list the reasons, but there's. I know where I got them from. They've got in the report. They have some quotes from people.
Oh yes, they've got the pull quotes. Yeah,
and the one about the personal life growth was, "My work does not give me the opportunity to go to church, visit family members, or travel for a while." So there's so much stuff in there.
Yeah. It really is interesting the way that this whole transition of the last few years has changed what people expect from work. Because can you imagine anyone saying that before the pandemic? It's got nothing to do with work about how you travel or go to church, or people wouldn't expect that to be an issue with how you felt about work. In most cases, certainly the sort of office-based knowledge work, they probably wouldn't even know what church you went to, never mind kind of be having any responsibility for that. So it really does speak to this huge change, and maybe again, that's leading to some kind of mismatch in expectation of what work needs to know about or be responsible for or help you with.
And so you're starting also to signpost us to the change in the psychological contract at work. So there's one thing I picked up with relation to there's lots actually, but one of the things the article from Forbes says, and it's been written by Keith Ferrazzi, who I really value, he basically is saying that the companies which thrived understood that dividing employees between technical and non-technical workers wasted the most radically human and readily available resource of all, talent. Companies with the most equitable approach to technology are 6 times more likely to have employees with an innovation mindset, Accenture found. This is not related specifically to engagement, and I've gone a little bit to one side, but I also think whether some of this disengagement, some of this quiet quitting, can be happening in those sectors which are being a little bit more neglected because so much focus has gone to the knowledge workers and the people for whom technology is enabling all kinds of flexibility and work. I wonder also whether some of that is happening.
Yeah, and people are losing the things that make us different from each other and not seeing the humanity. Maybe that's not kind of built into the workflow to connect in that way. And clearly we have the technology where people can share more of themselves. And as you said, there are apps where you can measure the emotional temperature of a team and notice how that might change over time and so on. But I think perhaps this is the equitable approach to technology. Maybe those kind of apps aren't available to some teams in the same way.
There's also, just going back to the point around the more holistic view, is the thinking that workers also expect their jobs to support them as complete people. It's going a little bit to what you were saying as well. With, I'm quoting now from the Forbes article, with space to self-define and be true to their authentic selves without judgment or repercussions. And I love this quote from someone from Wolters Kluwer: let's move away from the idea of work-life balance because it's not a thing. It hasn't been a thing since the internet.
Has it been a thing since work?
Yes, exactly. But I think that as well, this kind of, just going back also to that quote of someone who said, look, work is not allowing me to express myself in my non-work life. I think that the whole conversation around work-life balance, who wants it, who wants to achieve it, why, all of that is, we can also have a bit more of a reflection around that instead of assuming certain things and segmenting people also to think that certain people need that work-life balance and others no, and this is what it looks like. I don't know. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And again, it comes down to that kind of whole person thing of what are people expected or allowed to be their whole self at work, or is that maybe not so welcomed or encouraged? Is that the expectation now? Or did the balance go too far or swung a long way during the pandemic when managers suddenly realized they had to care about people's mental health and their emotional well-being and their mood and how it might change? And now there's a sense of, right, the emergency's over. Everybody go back to normal and suck it up and get on with it. And people are, whoa, hey, okay, I thought things were slightly different here, and now I have to just be a cog in the wheel again, and I can't express my whole self.
Yeah, I think as well there is that sense that, I don't know, I can imagine that some managers and some people had to bring more of that humanity than they were comfortable with as well. I think that it required, it's like when you have to do something in your job because you have to do it, it's the number one thing, and you don't like it, you don't enjoy it for whatever reason. And now that emergency situation is not that obvious, maybe, hey, we go back to the things we're more comfortable with. So, but I think it's that disconnection between what maybe some people saw and liked in how work was, and now the context has changed, and then the work environment has changed as well, and that might create, and people don't have the luxury that we have of going to a podcast and talking about this.
No, but these conversations need to be happening, don't they? People in teams need to be talking about, what happened then, and how did that affect us, and how did we respond to very specific circumstances, but how might that affect us now?
Yeah.
Now that it's, I read something, I can't remember where it was a few weeks ago. It was about just a newspaper column about someone being nostalgic for the lockdowns and the pandemic, talking about missing the banana bread and clapping and things like that. I don't think we're quite ready for nostalgia about the pandemic, but I wonder if there is something like that in workplaces, in some teams where people felt that they really pulled together and really supported one another and saw a new side of people they perhaps worked alongside for years. Even I definitely have spoken to people who said they felt closer to their colleagues when they were working apart because they just connected and disclosed more than when they sat in identical cubicles. And I wonder if there's a kind of a pang for that now where people are trying to get back to normal and maybe pretend that never happened.
Yeah. Oh, so complicated. Oh, so complex. Right, let's move through. So number 3, the next one. So although the world has recovered from the worst of the pandemic, employee stress remained at a record high level. And I wonder, like you're saying, whether this is some of it to do what you're saying as well. And that creates this kind of stress. So how they measured this is they asked how much stress people have felt the previous day. And 44% had experienced a lot of stress the previous day. This is mainly coming from East Asia, US, and Canada. And young workers and remote workers in East Asia were the most stressed out. So 30% of those who are engaged feel a lot of stress.
Yeah.
So it's still quite a good proportion. But 56% of actively disengaged feel a lot of stress. So there must be some relation or correlation somewhere, of course, with all of this.
Is the stress getting in the way of the engagement, or is it something that's resulting from it? Because I think most people want to feel engaged at work. They want to feel motivated. They want to feel that there's some point to what they're doing. And if you don't feel that, then that's bound to create its own stress. But whether it's external circumstances that caused you to disengage at work in the first place, very hard to unpick.
So much. And they are mentioning in the report that, of course, stress can also be because of external factors. And this made me think, I would love to see, although we're coming to a set of numbers later that might answer my question. But I wonder, because there's been this thing about either starting to go back into the office full-time or hybrid, so there has been some change of using a different medium. And I wonder how much stress that has caused some people. And I was listening to an episode of a podcast I've just found called Developing Leadership. And it was episode 34. If anyone is interested, I recommend it. It's one of the recommended episodes in the newsletter for June. And in that one, a remote worker was talking about how she had got very used to working from home full time and to managing her emotions in a way that suited her. So, whatever, shutting down the meeting or shouting at home and, whatever she needed to do. And how much going back into the office for a few days a week, how much that had cost her emotionally, and how she suddenly had to, again, make sure that people saw whatever amount of emotion she thought was useful. Yeah. And I wonder as well, I haven't heard this part of the adapting back into the office being talked about a lot. And it could be quite stressful, I imagine.
Yeah. I mean, and it must be in hybrid environments, you must be continually switching state as well. Just like literally putting on your suit or whatever that you wear to go into the office, you've got to maybe put on a certain set of emotions and behaviors and expressions. And if you've adjusted to something else, that transition is tough. But if you're continually changing every few days, that must create stresses that, never really thought about that.
There was an article, I think maybe even now a year ago, if not more, from the BBC that was saying how much stress actually the hybrid setup was causing some people because of where am I? Am I taking my laptop? What am I taking with me if I'm going into the office? I haven't heard that again, so I wonder whether that's just one of those things that you just get used to.
Yeah, maybe you just figure that out eventually, or you have a lot of stuff, maybe. I remember that at one point my parents were living between a place in London and a place in Wales, and they were constantly forgetting, where are those shoes? And they ended up with duplicates of an awful lot of things, and that just made life a lot more straightforward until they wanted to downshift back to one, of course.
And the other thing, of course, is that offices have changed. So you just reminded me when you said about having two sets. Maybe people were used to having their own spot in the office, and now that's gone because they're doing hot desking.
Yeah, where do you keep all your stuff?
I know that. I was in a pilot doing that, and it caused a lot of stress to make that switch because it's many years of having, like you say, your spot where you've got your things, everything is happening there. So it's, I wonder if that is also influencing.
That sense of self and your place in the world must be affected by that. If you suddenly have to hot desk and also do your work in two different places when you've done it in one place for years, it must all add up. It must all be part of that background radiation level of stress that we're all subjected to for so many different ways, and that's bound to affect how we handle things at work.
And the other thing that I'm wondering, and this is like the really cynical part of me, is the Hard Feelings book said that one of the reasons we lost motivation at work was we don't like our coworkers. And I've always said that one of the benefits of working in a remote team is that actually you don't need to personally like your coworkers as much as if you're spending a lot of time with them in the same place. And this can be a good thing because you can have a better working relationship if personally you just don't click with someone and you're not being with them a lot and everything is very work focused, then that can, for me, that can actually mean you have a stronger work relationship. And I wonder as well, again, maybe this is more social contact and that's managed differently.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think there's more risk of don't like turning into just don't speak to or don't, not interested in liking or getting to know that person, or find out if there's a good side of them where I may have misjudged them when I don't actually have to spend any time with them. We just work remotely. And so maybe if there is a problem, it could get more exacerbated in remote.
Yeah, well, I'm not even thinking of problems. I'm just thinking I know I've worked with people and I'm very happy to work with them, but I've then had to have a half an hour coffee with them and we haven't had anything to say to each other. But I do understand what you're saying. Sometimes it's worth working on our relationships, but there's always like this, especially when we've been talking about going back to the office, this image that everyone gets on wonderfully well and everyone is best friends at work, when actually that's not the case. All of these things, it's fascinating. So talking about location and how that could be an influence, actually, point number 6, they actually found that what's relevant to stress is engagement, not location. So what people experience in their everyday work, their feelings of involvement and enthusiasm matters more in reducing stress than where they are sitting. Which, when I first read it, I thought, oh, that's interesting. And now I'm reading it after we've had this conversation and thinking, well, can you really unpick everything in this way? I'm not sure.
I think that there must be a sense that if you're highly stressed and you manage to get into flow at work and you are really engaged and involved in something, then that reduces your stress just because you're immersed and your mental bandwidth is absorbed. And that could happen regardless of where you are, whether that's getting your head down at home or you're in something more interactive in the office, or you're interacting online in a very intense way. That could reduce your stress. It wouldn't fix whatever's causing the stress, but it might make you come to the end of that day and think, actually, I was really on then, and I don't feel stressed right now.
That's such a good point. Finding those moments so that people could, because there's this thing of engagement, to be honest, it's...
They're all subjective. It's just like stress. You say, how stressed are you yesterday or something, or how engaged were you? You could answer differently in 10 minutes time.
Because if we're saying, like going back to your point, if we're saying, okay, I can just see this, oh my God, our people are not engaged, we need some engagement activities and initiatives. And actually all you might need to do is see whether there's any way this is really radical. Is there any way of reducing any kind of workload? Is there any way that we can change our strategy slightly so that our people actually have time to do their work. And then, like you say, create engagement through the work, because that's giving people the time to do their work properly and the resources to do their work properly could be the key to a lot of engagement.
Absolutely. And it's got to be good for the manager, for the team, for the organization. Surely if you have engaged and happy people who are managing their stress well enough to really dive into the work, I'm sure they'll do better work.
So the daily stress by engagement and work location, the graphs, you look at them, and the actively disengaged have a lot more stress than the not engaged, than the engaged. But actually the bars, the way it pans out in fully remote, hybrid and on-site is very similar. So yeah, I mean, yes. And then you can interpret the data however you want about what that means.
Yeah, well, I think it also, we need to remember the spectrum of difference within each of those categories as well. And there's places that there are lovely offices and there are nightmare offices. There are places and teams that do remote well. There are individuals who do remote well, and there's a complete opposite. And it's not going to fix stress. And
the whole difference within just that hybrid thing also is...
that can include just about any combination of working in more than one place.
Yes. So there was this lovely quote, no location can fix poor management, and the office alone has no magic to create a great organizational culture. And I mean,
and remote alone can't fix it either.
Yeah, that's true. And that is true. That is very, very true. I don't know. I think some of the quotes are quite nice here. There was this one at home, because they're interesting because they're different. So I'll just read them for listeners. There's 3. So one says, I have more time to... This is around stress and engagement by work location. I have more time to spend with my family, with my wife, with my dogs. So I spend less time in traffic and more quality time with the people I care about. So that could do with stress. I guess having my workplace at home has made it more challenging to separate myself and step away from work. Mm-hmm. At home, I feel like my job is just work. Like there's not the fun stuff, the camaraderie, right? The relationship building is a little bit harder. So we see, I think what's really interesting with all these analysis and all the conversations and everything is that I don't think we realize like how diverse we all were.
Yeah. Yes. And it's easy to think people are like you.
Yes.
And maybe that is one drawback of remote work is possibly there's more tendency to not see or acknowledge those differences as much.
They're not as in your face, are they? Yeah. So, this is an interesting one actually. And it goes to what you were saying, and it goes back to the Forbes article, which is all about changing our psychological contract. And that article, which I forgot to say earlier, was based on a study that the authors have done, and also a study by Accenture. And one of the things they said was that fully remote employees at companies that haven't updated their relationship practices have friendship networks 36% smaller than their in-office and hybrid colleagues. And what they mean by that is what we know is that to build relationships in fully remote and even in hybrid, actually, organizations, you need to be intentional about it. And you can't leave things as they were and expect that relationships and networks are going to continue building as they were when everyone was in the office. So I think this is a really good point that they have, and that they've said that actually you need to change it because the medium has changed.
Yes, and I think people are almost probably getting a bit overwhelmed. We have to be intentional about that as well. We have to be intentional about how we communicate, how we learn, how we share information and all of that. And now we've got to actually manage how people form relationships as well. But yeah, you do, because things did happen more osmotically and more organically in a shared space. And there's no getting away from that, really. It feels like it's kind of obvious, but maybe it's not been said enough. There've been huge amounts of focus on communication and information management, and maybe there hasn't been enough focus on the relationships, especially with all the positivity around async, which is probably the hardest environment to build relationship. It's so good for the work, But there's so much more to do in terms of the people, and hopefully we'll reach that level of sophistication soon.
Well, I'm hoping that as Microsoft has pushed many practices through, that with their new rebranding of Yammer and all of that, that at least people will know now that there is an environment which can help to start to build relationships within organizations in a different way. So I'm hoping that's the next step. I was hoping it would come earlier, but all these enterprise social networks and stuff. And it's not that tech is going to solve the problem, but it's an environment. And just by thinking, could we use this environment to just get you thinking about, okay, we need to be doing things differently. So we shall see.
Yeah, it's a slow road, but it is hopefully getting there. I just, maybe there's a sense of tiredness that people think, oh, we know how to do remote now. Well, we should do. And now you're telling us there's still more we've got to do.
Yeah.
But it's for your own benefit, really, if you can, go that last few percent with the kind of really ambient, spontaneous kinds of communication and relation. That's the thing that could make all the difference to your happiness at the end of it.
Yes, and finally, the last point. Oh, I love this one, but it makes me so sad. Quiet quitting employees know what they would change about their workplace. 85% of the responses offered by those considered to be quitting were related to engagement or culture, pay and benefits, or well-being and work-life balance. And it's this sense that actually, well, I've got two things coming to my mind. One is that I think in some organizations, employees have really had a voice during the transition back to something, but in many they haven't. And the flip side of that is that, as we've seen, everyone needs different stuff. So sometimes it's just like, we know you all need different stuff, so we're just going to try this, see if it works.
And some of you won't get your needs met, actually. But that can't be the end of the conversation then, can it? I don't know, it's this whole kind of quiet quitting on both sides thing. Well, I'm not happy, but I'm not going to say why again. If I've already fed that back in a performance review or whatever, then... and things don't change. It is hugely frustrating if people are consulted, but then don't feel that's taken on board in any situation, in a relationship or sort of pay negotiations, like in the public sector in the UK at the moment. There's a sense that people feel aggrieved because their needs aren't being met, and there's like a missing bit of the conversation where the manager comes back and says, "You said you needed this at the moment. We can't provide that because what we're going to do instead is." And review that, so you don't just quiet quit and because you feel like you're not being listened to. Being listened to is such a big deal.
It is huge. And like you said, even if we understand most people are adults and we understand that we want something, but actually you can't do everything for everyone. So as you say, to say, we've heard you, we can't do that. However, we're doing this, and we'll continue to iterate. What I thought was very interesting, they have in number 7, they have the 3 buckets of what would you change about your workplace, and 41% of replies were under engagement or culture, 28% under pay and benefits, and 16% under well-being. And just going back again, my sarcastic self today, coming back to all the conversations we've had about having to go back to the office to build a great culture, none of the suggestions that they quote here under engagement and culture have anything to do with the location. We've got for everyone to get recognized for their contributions. This one is interesting because it's different to what I was saying earlier. I would like it if the managers were more approachable and we could talk openly. And again, it might go back to that thing, what does approachable look like now?
Yeah, and do people know what it is, Were they approachable before?
Yeah, that's true as well. So it is just carrying back.
Yeah, because I know some people have said that they find it easier now, sort of digitally, to approach when you're all in the same Slack.
Yes.
If they're not on a different floor, that secret office and the scary receptionist or something. Yeah. So, it's not about location. Clearly, those are huge cultural things.
They should grant more autonomy in the work to stimulate everyone's creativity. I would like to learn more things, but the work I do is quite repetitive. I just wish they respected me more. giving everyone a fair chance in getting promoted, and clearer goals and stronger guidance. So we're really moving beyond the where am I working from.
Yes.
I mean, of course, it's important, but it's interesting.
These are problems with work where, it doesn't matter where it is. These are problems with the work. Don't worry if your work's repetitive, because probably an AI will end up doing that. And then you will have to learn something new, but it will be more interesting. So.
Oh, this will be very interesting to see next year if they do this and they really look at those organizations which have integrated AI, especially the new generative AI more, and see how this has changed. That would be,
Yes. Well, it's going to be over the next few years, I think, when we start to see the impacts at scale. But yeah, I mean, I think probably right now, if you ask people, most people will say the main effect of AI is stress and anxiety about what it's going to take from me as an employee, whereas other people are seeing the potential.
Yeah, exactly. It depends. I think it really, again, and that's part of culture. If you've got a culture of innovation and experimentation, I'm sure everyone is actually going, okay, how do we use this to make us better? It's that quote I heard from someone say, it'll be the person that will keep their job will be the one that knows how to use.
Yes. And that applies at the organizational level as well. Absolutely. Yes. The teams that integrate this. That's always been the case with technology in any change. The people who got the right .com territory and, they didn't all make it big, but you can see the people who moved first tended to be the ones who could see what was coming, and that's not going to change those basic principles. So, yes, let's hope that there'll be some positive responses.
Well, watch this space. And listeners, we would love to hear your thoughts about the report, about whether this is something if you're working in an organization, does this match what you are seeing, what you're feeling? If you are outside an organization, what do you think of this? If you are starting to integrate the newly accessible technologies into your work. What do you feel? How is it going? Let us know. Pilar at virtualnotdistant.com for email, and virtualnotdistant.com. You can go there for the contact form. And if you enjoyed this kind of episodes, then sign up to the monthly newsletter, because there you get links to 3 or 4 articles every month, a couple of listening things, a book, blah, blah, blah. So, and the digest of all our content. You can sign up to that over at virtualnotdistant.com. Maya, any last parting words for this episode you'd like to share with our listeners?
No, I think we said we were going to try and do a short one. We've kept it under 45 minutes, so that maybe we're newly AI-powered, efficient podcasters.
Yes, what she said, listeners. Listeners, we know that you are also busy and that you have lots of other podcasts to choose from. So thank you very much for listening. A big thank you to Ross Winter for polishing the audio of this episode. And thank you, listeners, for choosing to listen to the 21st Century Work-Life podcast. Remember to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app, and you can check out the full show notes over at virtualnotdistant.com/podcasts. Talking of podcasts, we have another show you can listen to, Management Cafe, which you should also be able to find on all podcast apps. I have been Pilar Ortiz. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, enjoy.